Thank you so much, every one of you, for being here. My name is Val Red-Horse Mohl. I am the Chief Financial Officer of the East Bay Community Foundation and one of your co-hosts today for this important discussion. And I know that August is a time when we're thinking about vacations in the summer. And so just to have you here with us means so very much to us. And again, deep gratitude. As you might surmise from my name, I am of Indigenous heritage. I am Cherokee Indian. And so I would like to start the meeting by recognizing that for those of us that live in the Bay Area anyway, I currently do. I'm in the Silicon Valley area, actually. I would like to recognize the unceded lands of the Muwekma Ohlone people and thank them for their historic stewardship of this land. And for me as an Indigenous woman, the importance of a land acknowledgement is much more than gratitude for the historic stewardship of this land, but it's also a recognition and acknowledgement of our tribes that still exist today. They're our partners and our neighbors. We have 562 federally recognized tribes and many that are unrecognized. And it's important as we enter into this discussion today to think about communities of color, which includes our tribal communities, as we work to have equitable distribution of capital and really bring about solutions into those communities, including our tribal communities. So we not only thank them for their historic stewardship and recognize the hardships they've endured, but also look forward to them as partners and community members as we move forward. I think for me, if I had to frame the discussion today and the reason that I'm personally involved as well as our organization is when we think about our collective focuses of all of our foundation work and community work, and you can add up many, many issues. It can be elimination of poverty, prison reform, healthcare, food security, whatever the focus might be. If we are able to solve the racial wealth gap and bring about economic inclusion and equitable distribution of capital into our communities, in my humble opinion, as a financial professional, we solve many of those issues, or at least bring the resources into communities so that they can be solved. And I have spent my entire career focused on this particular notion of how do we get more capital equitably distributed. I think we all know that 97% of assets managed in the world and in the US are managed by white male-led firms, and most of those firms are headquartered in New York. And I work with many of those firms, and I'm happy to say that many of them also see that there's an inequity and are trying to be partners in this shift. And so as we work to shift capital into our communities today, this topic is so important to all of us because it's more than just a bank. It's more than just bringing an entity in as a business. It's really shifting assets and capital in ways that can be leveraged to repair and heal and regenerate our community and not have the money leave our community to benefit one of the 10 bulge bracket firms that historically have operated. And so again, I thank you for your time. I thank you for everyone who's worked so hard on this initiative. And we want to make it very much like a community town hall today. We'll be having some speakers to provide very important information, but please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and then later in the presentation, we'll have an open forum where you can ask questions openly, and we really want it to be interactive. This is for you today. And so with that, I am delighted to hand it off to my co-host and just an incredible activist in our community. I respect him so much. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Fred Blackwell, the CEO of San Francisco Foundation. Fred?
Thank you, Val. That was a great welcoming and introduction and setup. There's not much, I don't think, that I can add to that. It's great being a partner in crime with you and the East Bay Community Foundation on this and so many other things that we work on here in the Bay Area. I did want to say a couple of things by way of setup and maybe kind of give you some insight into kind of how we've structured the agenda. As Valerie said, I'm Fred Blackwell. I'm the CEO at the San Francisco Foundation and have been really kind of a student of the kind of public banking movement here in California for a while. And the more that I've talked to the team in the East Bay and other folks who have been involved in this work, the more I learn about what the potential and the power is of a public bank, the more that I've kind of come to the conclusion, like you, Valerie, that this is something that intersects very strongly with the San Francisco Foundation's North Star around creating a greater degree of racial equity and economic inclusion in the Bay Area. And there are a few reasons for that. One is, these are institutions that supplement and do not supplant the existing systems. And so, public banks have not been envisioned and set up in a way that replaces CDFIs, retail banks, and other institutions. The idea here is that we really need an additional set of financial tools to accomplish the things that we want to accomplish in community. And one of the ways to do that is to have a financial institution that is really more accountable to community than it is to shareholders or board members and those other things. And so that's really, I think, a key tenet for me. The other thing is I've learned more is the process of establishing these banks really aligns well with, I think, a lot of our values. This is something that is anointed from on high. Community members come together, they put this stuff together. There's a real process, some real thought put into governance and accountability and all those kinds of things. And so not only is this kind of a public bank in terms of the way that the dollars get populated, but it's a public bank in terms of the way that it's governed, structured, and put together, which I think is very powerful in thinking about how it intersects with many of the things that Valerie just talked about. And for that reason, we have not only been kind of students of this over the last few years, but we also provided some support for the early parts of a business plan. And, the game changer, frankly, was a couple of years ago, a couple of legislative cycles ago, Assembly Member Chu, who's now with the City and County of San Francisco, passed enabling legislation in Sacramento that really kind of accelerated all of the thinking that was going on in the state by setting out some rules to the game and really kind of putting out some guidelines around how public banks can be put together. And so that really has been an exciting development in this movement. And because of that, we did we hosted along with NCG a couple of weeks ago a forum. And the purpose of that forum was really to educate funders on what public banks are, what was in the enabling legislation in Sacramento, and where we are in the East Bay. The purpose of this meeting is to follow up and go a little bit more deeply on the topic. And so there are a number of things that the folks who are putting together this bank need in terms of financial support. So we wanted to have a follow-up meeting to put more meat on the bone, give folks who were at that briefing or who missed that briefing an opportunity to learn even more about the public bank movement generally and specifically what's happening in the East Bay. And then frankly, create an opportunity for us, if there's an intersection with any of your funding guidelines and priorities, to really see how this could maybe fit into that portfolio. And so that's really the purpose of today. And the way that we've structured it is that in a moment, you're going to hear from the Public Bank of the East Bay folks. Then we will go into a little bit of Q&A and discussion, and then we'll close out by kind of hopefully having some discussion with you about what the best way is to follow up and send more information and hopefully spark more interest and support from your institution. So with that, I will pause and I will turn it over to the team.
Great. Thank you so much, Fred. Good morning, everyone. My name is George Syrup. I am a board member with Friends of the Public Bank East Bay. We are a 501c3 nonprofit that has been advocating and organizing for the creation of a public bank in the East Bay for over 5 years. We're incredibly delighted to be presenting before all of you today. This has really felt like a meeting that's been a long time in the making, and we're delighted to share our vision for a more democratic financial future with you. We have prepared a short presentation for you. Some of this might be familiar if you participated in the last meeting, and hopefully there are some new details to help us get the discussion going afterwards. Natalie, would you mind? Thank you. So welcome. We'll go ahead and kick it off with the next slide. Today, we're going to cover a few brief areas. One is just some background on our project. Next is the impact that we imagine a public bank making in our region. We'll also discuss where we are currently in our project and what comes next. Next slide, please. So we're gathered here today because we all recognize that there is a problem with private banking. I don't think this should come as any surprise to folks that our financial system is currently benefiting from harming our communities. When we have a financial system that is designed to maximize profit for a handful of private shareholders, as opposed to maximizing the public good, we end up seeing banks that don't have a lot of accountability. And what that looks like in the material world is record investments in fossil fuel pipelines, investments in private prisons, and a lack of transparency or democratic decision-making around our dollars. Next slide, please. This is where the idea of a public bank comes in, and how it differs is in 4 key areas. A public bank would be owned and governed by the people that it serves. It would leverage its equity to make low-cost loans and provide credit, liquidity, and financial services to local financial institutions. I'm going to pause there and say this is a very key point, and we'll dive into it a little bit later in the deck, but we see ourselves as a partner for local financial institutions, not a competitor. A public bank could also distribute federal funds equitably and ethically, and we have case studies of that with the Bank of North Dakota, which is the current only public bank in the United States, and it was able to reinvest funds in the wake of the recession and in the wake of COVID more equitably and more quickly than any other financial institution in the country. And lastly, and most importantly, and one of the main reasons we're here today is that a public bank reinvests those profits not into the pockets of private shareholders, but actually reinvests those profits back into the community, keeping our dollars local and recirculating and creating more benefit year over year for all the institutions that surround us. Next slide, please. So public banking enables governments to do 2 key things. It allows us to divest public money from things that don't align with community values or priorities. As I mentioned earlier, fossil fuel investments in a time of climate crisis aren't aligned with our priorities or the public health and safety of our communities. And a public bank would also allow us to invest in sustainable local economies that meet our needs. Next slide, please. The model that we have in mind is a public bank that's owned and capitalized by local cities in Alameda County. We imagine this public bank growing by taking municipal deposits and providing banking services for the cities and county, charging low and fair fees. We also want to partner with local financial institutions to increase their capacity. And this bank, like many other banks, would be regulated by both the state and FDIC. Next slide, please. Our governance model is, to us, one of the main reasons why we are choosing to fundraise on our own. Is we really want to ensure that this bank has a governance model where folks from the community have a seat at the table. So we envision a 15 to 25 person board that's mission driven, and rather than just having, as Valerie had mentioned earlier, a board comprised of folks that have been historically represented, mostly white men on a board. We imagine a board that is comprised of community members, especially emphasizing historically marginalized and underserved populations. Of course, we want banking and finance experts, and folks from the city and county will also have representatives appointed as well. And because banking is a financially and technically complex institution, we also want to provide a training academy for community board members that are elected or appointed to ensure that they have the prerequisite knowledge to run this bank with the proper experience. Next slide. So recently we completed a viability study. This viability study was passed by the city of Richmond a few months ago, and our viability study outlines 4 key areas to start. When we have a project this large, I think it's important for us to start small, and we've targeted 4 areas to maximize impact and achieve profitability in the first 3 years. Those areas would be affordable housing development, residential electrification, small business lending, and municipal financing. And the goal for these 4 projects is to prioritize racial equity, environmental sustainability, community wealth building, and other local priorities. When we're looking at these issues, oftentimes with affordable housing developments, we're finding that finding the short-term capital to get a project off the ground is incredibly difficult. So we could accelerate the amount of units that we're producing through the creation of a public bank. If we're trying to meet our climate goals, residential electrification also helps renovate pre-existing buildings, adding to our housing stock while meeting our climate goals. Small business lending allows us to provide entrepreneurs in the area with new investment opportunities that they would not have otherwise received through private Wall Street institutions. And municipal financing allows us to refinance loans that cities have already taken out at lower rates, providing more revenue for cities without increasing fees. And so this is really an opportunity to increase municipal revenue without increasing taxes on residents. So we can avoid regressive taxation and actually provide more resources for our municipalities through a public bank. Next slide, please. Another impact that a public bank can make, especially for folks in this room, is that we provide an alternative to Wall Street for foundations and philanthropists looking to invest endowment funds to achieve and maximize their impact. Next slide. And so now we're moving into where we are now. And I wanted to pause here because this is a transformative movement. This is an institution that can really, I think in the technology space, people say disrupt a lot, but disrupt feels a little bit destructive, but we can really transform how finance is handled on a local level. We are part of the California public banking movement, and the project that we're moving forward to advance is a result of the legislation that the assembly member passed that Fred mentioned earlier, AB 857, the California Public Banking Act. And if we're able to create a public bank in this moment, this will be the blueprint for the rest of California and the rest of the country for what a public bank, a modern public bank, could look like. And so if we are able to achieve this funding, we can increase investments in our immediate community. We can open the first public bank in 100 years and serve as that new model. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we've been organizing for over 5 years. We're incredibly proud of what we've accomplished. Recently, we published a viability study, which was approved by the city of Richmond and is under consideration by the cities of Oakland and Berkeley. We've actually contracted the former president of the Bank of North Dakota, Eric Hardmeyer, as a consultant. We have engaged Gary Finley of Finley and Associates to help us write our business plan. Gary has helped start over 200 banks, and we're incredibly excited to have him on board. We're in the preliminary process of vetting bank board candidates. We have over 15 from various sectors such as housing, labor, green energy, and finance. And we've been meeting regularly since January with an upcoming in-person gathering planned as well. And we also engaged with Gwyneth, an experienced development consultant, to support our fundraising for startup costs. So this has been a project that's long been in motion and is really gaining momentum, and is one of the reasons we are presenting before you today. Next slide, please. So what comes next? We are in the process of the early stages of writing our business plan. We also want to continue to recruit and vet bank board candidates. We're getting to the point where we want to hire a CEO and an executive team to help us move this project forward more consistently as we work with agency partners. And once the business plan is complete, we will be applying for a California public bank charter with the state and then FDIC approval. Next slide, please. So when we are looking at startup costs, we estimate we need to raise around $2.4 million. We have covered our operating costs as a nonprofit completely for the rest of the year. So any dollars raised are going towards the creation of this public bank. We estimate the business plan will cost around $250,000, executive staff salaries around $650,000. We need to go through a board member vetting and recruitment process. Of course, we've also earmarked some fees, some dollars for legal and consulting fees. And then for any modern financial institution, we will need technology. We will have to pay for fixed assets and other miscellaneous fees. Next slide, please. Where we imagine foundations and other philanthropists being able to help is contributing towards this $2.4 million in startup costs. I really want to emphasize here that this is a one-time expense. We only require the costs that were outlined in the previous slide to get this bank off the ground. Once it's operating and functional, we believe that it will be self-sustaining. However, there are other ways in which folks can help contribute to the growth and success of this project, such as referring potential bank board and executive candidates to our organization. We're always looking for more political support at the city, county, and state level. Any additional donor connections or workshops are welcomed, and we're happy to facilitate one-on-one conversations after this presentation. Any technical experts you may have in mind, we would love to meet. And if you're interested in being more directly involved in this completely volunteer-led movement, we are always looking for new members. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we are a group of all volunteers. However, we are incredibly proud of the work that we've done, which has included raising approximately $250,000 to date. We are so thankful for the San Francisco Foundation's support early on in our process. Also, the County of Alameda, the City of Oakland, Friends of the Earth, several members from Bay Area Resource Generation, our board members for giving. We've also run nonprofit advertising campaigns online to bring in funds, and we have a whole network of anonymous and grassroots donors. Next slide, please. So without spending too much time on the slide deck, that concludes the presentation, and we welcome your questions and the ensuing discussion. We've left some information on the slide deck, which will also be shared afterwards if you're interested in following up on this conversation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, George. That was super comprehensive. I appreciate that. And by the way, Natalie, who is working so hard on the logistics of this presentation, has confirmed that if you want a recording of this session, she can also include that PowerPoint, because there was a lot of great information in that. And I know I couldn't take copious notes as fast as you were going, George, but it was really, really good. Thank you. Natalie, have you been following if there are questions in the chat? I just really want to open it up right now because there's been a lot of information provided, and I saw in the initial introductions in the chat that many of you are here just to really try to understand more about the public bank. And so we want to open it up for questions and make sure that you leave today with a complete comprehensive understanding.
I haven't seen any questions come in the chat yet, but please do add them in there, or at this time you could also come off mute if you have a question, or raise your hand and you can field those to Valerie.
I'm going to start with a question for George and Susan and the entire team that's been working so hard on this. I know that there is a viability study, and there's also more information on, the open call for board members. Maybe tell us a little bit where we find that, where that is, just a little more information if people are interested in that.
Susan, you're muted.
I can take that one. My name is Debbie Notkin. I'm the chair of the Friends organization, the advocate organization that is putting this together. And both the viability study and the information about for people who want to join the board and who's already on we say board, who want to become a candidate for the bank board or who's already a candidate, are all on our website, which is publicbankeastbay.org. The viability study is about 50 pages long. It's got financials. It's very intense. And we're happy to talk to you about what's in it. And the current board candidates and the application to become a board candidate are also on the website. Again, publicbankeastbay.org.
Great, thank you, Debbie. And I just want to point out that Debbie and Susan and George and I think there's a few others on the team, but they have been working on this for over 5 years. You don't start a bank overnight. It's a very methodical process. They have been champions, and I really respect the work that has gone into it. And I know that when Susan first reached out to me, I didn't know what it was, and I didn't respond right away, and she hunted me down in a good way. And so I really, really appreciate their dedication. The other thing that I wanted to make sure was clear, and Fred mentioned it in his intro, but I think it's worth repeating. A public bank does not compete with our local community bank partners. I know at East Bay, we are very committed so that we have some of our cash deposits and we spread out our business, as it were. And so we have money in Cedars programs and cash, programs with a lot of local banks in Oakland. and Contra Costa and Alameda counties. And the idea of a public bank is really to custody and house public funds, and then be able to work with other banks and CDFIs and leverage that money into loans and work with intermediaries. And so we're not disrupting or competing with those partners that have been good community partners. We would like to compete though with the bulge bracket banks out of New York that right now get most of the municipal business. And I think there was an example in our last session that the city of Oakland alone pays something like 60 million in fees to the big bulge bracket bank that they bank with. And so just again, wanted to make sure that point was taken. I do see some questions coming in the chat. So it looks like, Anthony has a great question. What are the pros and cons of a city managing their own independent bank versus cities joining together to become part of a regional bank with multiple city members? I'm definitely going to ask someone from the public banking side, maybe Susan, to answer that question.
Yeah. Well, to be fairly crass, cities don't have as much money as counties. So in our case, we're partnering with the 3 cities we're working with are partnering with Alameda County, because that's where the money is. That's where the property taxes go. And we need all the money we can get for to capitalize the bank. Also, the more cities and other government agencies that are part of the bank, the more effective it can be, the bigger its reach. The downside is that it takes a little cooperation. The various city councils and boards of supervisors have to agree to work together and share responsibilities on the bank board. But they're all on regional boards together to do other things, so they're experienced at doing that. We don't anticipate that as a problem.
Great, thank you, Susan. And I will say that if you missed the last session, we had a great case study from the Bank of North Dakota, which is the entire state. And so that's many cities and counties, coming together. And I think the whole success of that case study is that collaboration between the various counties and cities. And so it was a great question, but it really is nice when the cities and counties could, and other municipalities, there are, like, I think someone mentioned BART is technically a quasi-government agency. And so it doesn't have to be just a city or a county. It's really any municipality that has funds and needs banking and a custodian for those funds. There's another great question, and I'm going to be so bold as to answer this question because this is my life. This is what I spend about 110% of my time doing. And it's a great question from Leonardo. If the public bank refuses to invest in fossil fuels, private prisons, and other harmful but monetarily lucrative investments for the benefit of the community it serves, how does that affect its ability to grow revenue? So I'd love to send you some posts that I've posted on East Bay's website, because when I came on board East Bay, and for those of you that don't know, we manage a little under $1 billion in donor advised funds. And like many foundations, when I came on board, we were doing incredible work with our grant making, which is usually anywhere from 10 to 20% of your overall holdings. But then you have the 90%, in our case, it's more like 80% invested in the market. And if you have a traditional, I'm going to say traditional, meaning, one of the big banks managing your money and directing those investments in these sort of traditional ways, a lot of index funds, S&P 500 type funds, you will be invested in fossil fuels and private prisons and chemicals and guns and all the things that we don't want to be invested in terms of emission alignment. And so my job was to divest of all of those things that did not align with our mission. And I took a very bold move in making it a priority to invest strategically into managers around racial equity strategies. So we invested into managers of color. We redefined risk. We invested in strategies that only invest in publicly traded companies that demonstrate racial equity in a positive way. And I did it with a pocket of money we call our opportunity pool. And we have looked back on a year, and it's been a very volatile year, but even in a volatile year, we have outperformed the rest of the market. And so to me, it's really a myth that you have to be invested in fossil fuels and other detrimental strategies in order to make return. You do have to be smart about your strategic investments. They're not concessionary, they're not program related investments. Those are a whole nother category. But it's exciting to me to be able to look at a portfolio where we very carefully invested and divested, and yet our returns are way above benchmark. So sorry that I took so long on that answer, but it is my passion. Okay, let's go to the next question. Henry has a comment about banking fees. Henry, you take the floor.
Thanks, Valerie. As the treasurer of Alameda County, I just want to, I think, Valerie, you said it at the last meeting. I just want to, let's stop saying, I mean, I'm not sure and I haven't looked. I don't think the city of Oakland is paying $60 million of fees. So let's just, I don't want to, I'm sort of into facts. I don't know how much they pay. The Alameda County, we pay we are charged about $500,000 for Alameda County. And we don't often pay that. A lot of it is used up in through what's called an earnings credit if we invest a certain amount in our bank. So I don't know what the city of Oakland pays, but $60 million can't be right.
I can clarify that. It's not just fees, it's interest and fees.
Well, the interest must be on debt. It couldn't.
Yeah.
But they would be paying that anyway. Till I know that's I don't want to bog us down in details, but
they would be paying that anyway. But if we refinance Oakland, for instance, the Oakland's bonds, we can, one, refinance them at a somewhat lower interest rate, and two, whatever interest the city of Oakland pays the public bank can go back to the city of Oakland as bank profit. So it's essentially borrowing for free. The 60 million isn't going to Wall Street anymore. It's staying right here.
And Henry, I will just add, whenever you have money that's managed, there's so many hidden fees because it comes out of what we call assets under management, as opposed to an actual invoice you receive where you see it listed. So quite often you're paying a lot more fees than you even realize. And to Susan's point, some of those fees, or to your point, I should say, some of those fees you're going to pay anyway, but let's try to recycle them back into the community. I think Henry's point is well taken, though. If we're going to say that, we should say fees and interest payments, because it's not just fees.
Right.
And thank you for that clarification. We have a very good question from Anthony. Anthony, I feel that this might be the whole point of this session, so great that you queued it up. Anthony is saying, what role does philanthropy play in the future of public banking, both in the short term and the long-term sustainability of this work?
Yeah, I can jump in very quickly to start the answer, and then I'll hand it off to my fellow board members here. I think in the short term, this is an opportunity to create an entirely new public institution for relatively low cost for philanthropists. And in the long run, I also think that philanthropists and foundations can also begin to deposit in the bank once it's more established and see their investments actually yield more significant community benefits in the long run. And so to summarize that, short term, the creation of an entirely new public institution, long run, a place to maximize community benefit. And I'll hand it off to Susan or Debbie if they want to add on to that answer.
I just want to say one thing is that philanthropy in the sense of giving money is we perceive as only short term. We perceive needing no philanthropy, no donated funds from the day the bank opens its doors. However, a lot of foundations and other philanthropists we talk to, as Val just so clearly explained, are concerned about where their money is. So once the bank opens, we perceive it as providing a benefit to the philanthropic community in terms of having another really clean, good place to keep your endowment money, and that will also help the bank grow more quickly and thrive.
And while we're on this topic, George or Susan, what is the amount that you need short term right now that will probably come from a lot of philanthropic donations?
George, do you want to put that slide back up again? Or Natalie, maybe?
Slide 13 would be helpful, Natalie. Thanks. So in total, we're looking for the 2.4 million. However, I would say the first 3 line items are where we currently are at the moment. So we really want to move forward on the development of our business plan, ensure that we can bring on executive staff so that we're moving this project forward at a consistent rate, and also begin to finalize the board, which will allow us to apply for our public banking charter. So to answer your question, Valerie, I would say that the first 3 line items here are definitely priority. However, if we're able to meet our goals, it would streamline the process of us applying for a public bank charter significantly, in addition to building out the technology that we need and finding the space that we need to make the bank operational on a shorter timeline.
Thank you, George. And I think this is a good segue. We're very curious, those of you that have joined, to learn more. And if financial inclusion and focusing on eliminating the wealth gap is part of your mission and racial equity, what help us understand, perhaps, does this align with your giving priorities, or what maybe what more would your foundation or organization need to see? We're at the very beginning of this process, and so it's really helpful for us to learn from you about how you view this.
Are you asking for the friends to give some examples?
Yeah, I think it would be great, because we're presenting this, and it'd be great to get some feedback from some of the foundations that are on the call, just to say, well, this sounds great, but if you worded it, I don't know. I mean, we just would love some feedback to hear about how it aligns with your particular foundation's work.
Maybe I can add that I see that several of the people on the call are interested in very affordable housing. George, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So when it comes to what's outlined in our viability study, which are the first areas that we'd like to focus on, and we can remove the slide deck for now, if that's okay, just so we can all see each other. Thank you. A lot of affordable housing developers struggle to find short-term financing to get their projects off the ground. Our hope is to partner with local financial institutions to provide extra capital to help those projects break ground. So one example of this, maybe it's a land trust, maybe it's affordable housing developer. They may go to a community bank or a CDFI and ask for a loan, and the interest rate might be a little higher than is preferred. And so a project isn't making any progress. However, if a public bank were to enter the arena, we could partner with that CDFI or that community bank and provide some capital to help drive down that interest rate. And now we're breaking ground on an entirely new project. Now we're seeing development. Now we're adding housing stock to the market. Now we're seeing folks get in off the streets, be able to afford living in their own cities. And that's a real material benefit to our communities, and one of the first areas we want to target with our public bank. And then I would say, outside of housing, even talking about small business lending, we can use an example of maybe a mom and pop food truck business. They might go to Chase Bank, ask for a $50,000 loan, and that might be too small for them to even consider. And so we're not seeing this family that's trying to be entrepreneurial and make a living for themselves in our community able to get their business off the ground. However, with a public bank and a public bank that's mission driven, like the way we imagine and are designing ours, we would say this is the exact kind of project that we want to invest in our community. We want to prioritize making loans to entrepreneurs in our community, and we want to partner with a community bank or a CDFI to help extend capital to get that business off the ground. And so this is one of the ways in which we are creating wealth in our community, especially around historically disenfranchised communities that have been denied these types of loans and services for decades. I hope that answers the question. Let me know if that was a little off base.
I think that was great, George, as an example of one area, but there's so many areas like affordable housing that the small business loans, I think, also get me excited. I know that at East Bay, we have implemented a program where we try to encourage our DAF holders to make investments into the community, into small business owners. And these are for-profit enterprises because they're just not getting the access to capital that they need. And so affordable housing, small business, economic development in the community. And I want to go back to a question in the chat that I think is important for all. And that is, someone asked me, well, a couple of people asked me, you know, who can they reach out to one-on-one if they have some particular questions? And then also where is more information? So we'll put it in the chat, but I just want to say it now while it's being recorded. The website is publicbankeastbay.org. The person to reach out to one-on-one for questions is Susan. And her email is susanharman1. So let me spell that, SusanHarman1 @gmail.com. Again, we will put this in the chat. And you're welcome to copy myself or Fred, and you will have those emails as well. So we want to encourage you to follow up. Again, we know there's a lot of information being shared, and some of you do have very specific questions related to your specific mission of your organization and how you may want to get involved. As it was said earlier, it's not all about the donations. We're looking for referrals to board members, and there's just lots of ways to support the bank. So are there any other questions for the group?
Val, I have one. This is probably partially for the public bank team, and maybe even Henry may want to weigh in on this as well. Can you all talk a little bit more about the political process here? You referred very quickly to approvals that you are anticipating from Richmond, Berkeley, Oakland, I'm assuming Alameda County as well. What are those approvals? How difficult is that going to be? Is it a heavy lift? Is it going to be something that's easy to get people to support? If you could just talk a little bit about that process.
Where we are right now is that the city of Richmond back in April, as George said, approved the viability study, which is required by the Public Banking Act, the state law. And we're in the process. Everybody's on summer break right now, but in September, we will present the viability study to both Oakland and Berkeley for their approval. The county is not required to approve the viability study through a technical quirk in the law. So we don't need county approval until the bank has a license to operate, which we anticipate will be sometime in the next year. But we, of course, are talking to all of the county supervisors and county staff, starting with Hank and going on from there, to be sure that they will approve the bank when the appropriate time comes. So we're working with the three cities basically right now.
And Susan, is it a heavy political lift? Are folks already inclined to support this? Is there the need for advocacy here?
Maybe I'll take that one.
Okay.
We have a lot of support in the cities and in the county, and we don't anticipate, I don't know what a heavy lift is, Fred. Most of it is not heavy, but when it actually comes to transferring dollars, that is something about which we want our county supervisors and our city council people and our financial directors and Hank to be conservative and careful and thoughtful. And so it is an intentionally complex lift to jump that gap, to say you can do this new and transformational thing safely. And that is one of the reasons that we need public support.
I can add, Fred, a couple things. One is, I know that even when I've spoken to supervisors who were in support of it, some of them said, well, like if we're going to put money into it, it should be ours. And I think people are going to have a hard time allowing it to be a little bit independent, but it really has to be for so many reasons, you know, Brown Act reasons, and, you know, just, it's got to be, you know, special finance specialists. So they're going to have to let go. So that's going to be a heavy lift too. And also, and everybody's worried about the risk of it, you know, and, you know, AB 857 allows the investment in this, but I don't know if you followed some of the, you know, when the state was thinking about doing a state bank, there was a little bit of dispute between Fiona Ma and Betty Yee. And that was a kind of a good difference. Someone like Betty was very conservative and thought if it's going to happen, it has to be, this has to be seen as an expenditure. You know, I think Fiona was more saying, no, this is an investment. So that kind of debate is also taking place.
The law,
Very helpful. Thank you.
if I can just add one more thing, the law, AB 857, requires that the banks be corporations on their own. So they will not be run by the government agencies that that basically own them. They'll be run by an independent corporation and staffed with bankers.
And Susan, I think that's a good segue to another question that came through the chat that I want to address. And I think it's a really important concept. This bank, as a public bank, technically is a for-profit. It's not a nonprofit, but it's a public benefit corporation, which is very different than private banks are structured in a way to bring shareholder value and founder and owner value and to drive up revenue. And this bank will have a lot of discretion around fees and community pricing, because that's not the purpose. I mean, of course, you want to make enough money to pay your overhead, but it's very, very different than, you know, say Bank of America or something where you're looking strictly at shareholder value. And the reason I bring that up, someone in the chat was mentioning that loans into the community are very important. And so that's an area that I've worked very hard on. And I want to make sure that we understand how loans into the community actually work. You know, there's a cost of capital. And so we have a lot of intermediaries that actually originate loans to founders. And those can be small banks, they can be SBA entities, they can be CDFIs, community development financial institutions, but whoever they are getting their capital from some source, and the cost of their capital then determines the cost to the founder. And what we have found is it's not just about the interest rate, it's also the terms. And so the SBA program, as an example, who really says, you know, they promote small business and they want to support women and people of color, they actually require an equity component where you have to have about 20% of whatever you're borrowing in some sort of hard asset. And for many women and people of color who historically haven't had the opportunity of ownership, that's sometimes very hard to meet. And so those types of criteria, depending on where the source of capital is coming from, can be lessened. And it doesn't really add to risk if you're looking at a business that can still cash flow and make those payments. And so if the East Bay Public Bank has capital that they can then lend to CDFIs and intermediaries at a reasonable rate, then that is passed on to the founders. And some of those terms relaxed to the point where anyone who's supporting the public bank is then in essence supporting the community lending programs. Oh, we have a good question here from Caleb. How does the proposed bank plan on addressing concentration of risk issues? Meaning, if all of the loans are in the East Bay, a major earthquake could hurt a lot of borrowers' ability to repay. So geographic risk, I guess, is the question. George, any thoughts, or Susan?
I'll as the brave one here, I'll jump in again. I think that's a question to which we on the call have not given an enormous amount of thought, and it clearly deserves it. but our banking experts, including Gary Findley, our banking attorney, and Tom Seguros, who was the principal on our viability study, do a lot of risk management, risk analysis, stress analysis. And I would like to defer that question to them and get back to Caleb.
Sounds good. And I will say that a lot of that type of natural disaster risk, I know I have flood insurance, believe it or not, at the East Bay Community Foundation. I have no idea if we will ever have a flood in Oakland, but a lot of it is handled by insurance, and just, you know, measuring the likelihood of what is needed. Okay, I am not seeing any other questions in the chat. And so Fred, I think I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, I think we'll probably be able to close out a little bit early, but before doing so, wanted to make sure we at least pose the question to funders on the call, what the best way is to follow up with you. I mean, if you desire a follow-up from any of the team here, we're happy to do that. But really looking to you all to see kind of what the best way is to follow up on additional questions, more information, all that kind of stuff.
Also, if funders could let us know maybe in the chat what the best way is for us to reach them directly for follow-up, that would be great.
Yeah. And you can put all that information in the chat. Really just want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you to the team for a really kind of thorough a glimpse into what the bank is and what it's going to take to get it off the ground. And we really hope that we are able to recruit more of our philanthropic partners to help to get this off the ground. I think one of the things that George mentioned that is probably worth repeating is that we are really looking for one-time kind of startup costs. And so this isn't one of those things where we get our hooks in you and you're on the hook for support in perpetuity. Really, the support that's needed right now is to get it off the ground, and we anticipate that when it gets off the ground, it will be able to support itself. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for the consideration. Thank you to the team for the presentation. And unless there are any other questions or comments, I think we can let you go.